Have you ever wondered what happened to the legendary Chuck Norris? I recently saw a video he made, and I was shocked. More than 50 years after taking on Bruce Lee in The Way of the Dragon, he's now in his 80s and still kicking ass, working out and staying active. He says he's stronger, can work out longer, and even has plenty of energy left over for his grandkids. He says he still feels like he's in his 50s. He did this by making just one change. His wife even started doing this one thing too, and she's never felt better. She says she feels 10 years younger, her body looks leaner, and she has energy all day. So how did he do it? Well, Chuck made a special video that explains everything, which you can watch by going to chuckdefense.com/daily, or by clicking the link below this video. It could change the way you think about your health. Once again, that's chuckdefense.com/daily, and click on the link in the description below to watch the video now. You won't believe how simple it is. Just a reminder, the legendary Chuck Norris is a whopping 84 years old and yet has more energy than me. He discovered he could create dramatic changes to his health simply by focusing on 3 things that sabotage our bodies as we age. See how he did it by clicking the link in the description below, chuckdefense.com/daily. Hello and welcome to this special episode of The Sceptic with me, your host, Laurie, an associate editor at the Daily Sceptic. My guest today is CJ Hopkins, an American playwright, author, and political satirist who now lives in Germany. In his works, CJ Hopkins has long written about the authoritarianism lurking in Western societies. Now, as if to prove him right, he's facing prison in Germany for doing just that. In 2022, he tweeted an image of a swastika on a COVID mask, the cover of his book, The New Normal Reich. And this was enough to see him dragged through the German courts in a legal battle that's still ongoing. So, to tell his story, I'm very pleased to be joined by CJ Hopkins now. Welcome to The Sceptic, CJ.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Okay, so before we get into your ordeal in Germany, just tell us a bit about yourself if you could. So, a bit about your career. I mean, many of our viewers will have heard of you, but some of them perhaps won't have. And also, you're an American. How did you end up living in Germany?
Yeah, that's a long story. I'll try to make it short. Basically, I'm a playwright, and I have become a novelist and a political satirist more recently, but spent most of my career working in the theater. Started in New York City a million years ago, writing weird plays and producing those downtown. Got lucky with a play and won some awards in Edinburgh in 2002. And that play toured around the world. I was in Europe quite a bit at that time. And this was shortly after the U.S. invasion of Iraq. The atmosphere in the United States was pretty ugly at the time. And long story short, I just wanted to come and live in Europe. I wanted to get out of the U.S. And Berlin was one of the easiest places for an American to settle in Europe. And at that time, it really reminded me of San Francisco back in the 1980s before the dot-com boom. It was cheap and wild and sexy. And, I just felt like I fit right in here. And so here I am 20 years later.
And you've been continuing with writing plays and things, but also, of course, you started to write novels as well. So your first one, I think, was in 2017, and that was more of a political satire. So how did you enter into political commentary in Germany?
Really, my political satire and commentary didn't, it wasn't really focused on Germany. It still isn't primarily focused on Germany. And it started back in 2016. And what at that point, I was still living like a hermit. I wasn't online, wasn't on any social media. I was, toiling away at my huge, strange novel. And what pulled me out of my hermititude was basically this whatever we want to call it, this populist uprising that happened. I mean, it happened in the UK with Brexit, various populist movements rising up in Europe, continental Europe, and then, of course, Donald Trump, the whole Trump phenomenon. And this got my attention because it felt like something new was happening. I had been tracking the war on terror and kind of addressing it obliquely in my plays and what have you. But this got my attention, and it prompted me to start writing essays, which I started just sending into Counterpunch. And that has evolved into, The Consent Factory, my ongoing political satire.
Yes. And so all of that's going on. And then, of course, COVID happens and you start writing about that in Germany in particular. And this culminates in this book you've authored called The Rise of the New Normal Reich. And it's because of the cover of that book that you got into all this trouble. And just sort of tell us about what was in that book and what you were saying about COVID and Germany.
Well, yeah, let me back up just a little bit because in my first two collections of essays, I was tracking the whole response, basically the establishment response to Trump and that populist backlash that I just referred to. And that kind of segued seamlessly into the COVID period. I think it's difficult for people to remember, but COVID, the whole COVID phenomenon started in 2020, which was the last year of the Trump administration. And we went through everything that we went through in that year. And in the US, there were the riots, of course, throughout the world. There were the draconian lockdowns and what have you. And the end of 2020, culminated with the dethroning of Trump and the installation of Biden and what have you. What I saw with the COVID phenomenon was kind of the culmination of the response to this populist backlash against whatever people want to call it. It's global capitalism, and that upsets a lot of people if I use the word capitalism. And so call it corporatism, call it whatever you want to call it. But that's really what I had been tracking and continued to track during the whole COVID thing. And in 2020, what I saw right off the bat, and it wasn't really focused on Germany. Most of my essays are not about Germany. They're about countries throughout the West. But as early as the spring of 2020, it was pretty much established that, we didn't have an apocalyptic plague here on our hands. Whatever it was, it did not in any way justify shutting down society, locking down society, and imposing all of these authoritarian measures on society. And so that's what I started tracking. The book, a lot of people assume that the book refers to Germany. It doesn't. The new Normal Reich that I'm referring to is a global Reich.
Right. Okay. So it's good to clear that up. So it's a global point you're making there, but obviously this is particularly salient in Germany, obviously with its history and also with the fact that nowadays it has these sort of anti-Nazi speech laws, which means that you can't reproduce any Nazi symbols or things like this in many contexts. And so, well, how did you end up getting into trouble specifically in Germany for this book?
Let me back up a little bit again and say, although I wasn't, specifically or exclusively focusing on Germany, I did absolutely focus on Germany. And, I live here. And so I experienced everything here up close and personal. And I've often said that, what Germany did was really not much different than what other countries like Australia and the UK and the US did, but they did it in a particularly German fashion, which to an American is really disturbing.
And how did you get into trouble with the German authorities?
I had been active on social media, expressing dissent and protest against the COVID measures from the very beginning. That didn't get a lot of attention from the German authorities. Some of my tweets got censored, but most of them were ignored because I was writing them in English. In May of 2022, I published that book, The Rise of the New Normal Reich. It's my third collection of essays. And the cover of the book is kind of an homage to William Shirer's classic book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. If people are familiar with some of those covers, my brilliant cover artist, Anthony Freda, and we basically stole the cover artwork. We copied one of the covers of that book, which is exactly the same as the cover of my book. And the only thing we did is we put a COVID mask over the swastika on the cover. So I was promoting that book starting in May of 2022. jump forward to August of 2022. In Germany, there was a big debate about should we finally end the mask mandates? And there was a lot of hysteria around this. I put out a couple of tweets using the cover art of the book, the swastika covered by the mask. And I wrote something to the effect of, masks are just ideological conformity symbols, and that's all they are. Basically, they're theater. Yeah. These tweets caught the attention of an entity called the Hessen Cyber Competence Center, which is a department of the Ministry of the Interior of the federal state of Hesse, and it's also a partner in this national network of entities, including the German Secret Service and the Federal Criminal Police Office, which monitors the internet for dangerous, hate speech. So these tweets came to the attention of this entity, and they reported the tweets to Twitter to be censored. Twitter censored the tweets. At the same time, my book was banned by Amazon in Germany, and then in Austria and the Netherlands. At the same time, this entity reported me to the Federal Criminal Police Office, which then forwarded my case to the Berlin Public Prosecutor's Office, which launched an investigation of me, which I didn't know about until much later, and which culminated in my prosecution on charges of spreading propaganda in support of a former National Socialist organization. Basically, I was charged with disseminating pro-Nazi propaganda.
And just to go back for a second, so you're tweeting the cover image of this book, but the book had already been out for 3 or 4 months already by this point, and that didn't seem to come to anyone's attention then. You published it okay, did you?
Yeah, the book was published and distributed worldwide, distributed through Amazon and through Ingram, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, English language book distributors in the world. It was a Barnes & Noble bestseller, Amazon bestseller in numerous categories when it was released, selling really well throughout the world. And I sold a few copies in Germany as well before it was banned, unofficially banned. So yeah, the book had been out for quite a while.
Okay. It must have surprised you then that it was only sort of reminding people of what the cover of this book already was that really got you into hot water here.
I wasn't surprised when Twitter censored the tweets. That happened in August of 2022. I was a bit alarmed when Amazon actually banned the book in Germany and Austria and the Netherlands. And I wrote about it and published some essays about it. It wasn't until June, I think, May or June of 2023, that I found out that there was a criminal investigation underway and that I had been charged with a crime. And it was shortly thereafter that I received in Germany, it's a Strafbefehl. It's called an order of punishment. So my sentence was handed down, without a trial or without any opportunity for me to address it. So I got a lawyer and we challenged that. And long story short, ended up at my first trial in January of this year in the district court, Berlin District Court, where I was, of course, acquitted. The judge recognized immediately that my tweets were not supporting the Nazis or neo-Nazism or anything like this. And for people who are not familiar with German law, I should probably explain a little bit. Yes, there is a ban on Nazi insignia, Nazi symbols in Germany. And I actually support this ban. I'm a free speech absolutist, mostly. I make an exception for Germany. I don't particularly want to see neo-Nazis running around in the streets of Germany waving swastikas and Nazi insignia. So there is a ban on Nazi symbols in Germany, but there are very clear exceptions that are written into this ban. And of course there are, because you couldn't teach a history course or show a movie if these exceptions weren't written in. One of these exceptions is for art. Another one that specifically applies to my case is one is allowed to display Nazi symbols if one is doing that in order to counter or protest against anti-constitutional activity, which is, of course, exactly what I was doing. I was comparing the authoritarian COVID measures and the suspension of the German constitution and constitutional rights and the whole totalitarian program. I was comparing this to the rise of Nazi Germany. That exception is clearly written into the German statutes. And I knew that. And so I was rather surprised when I was, charged and dragged into court for doing this.
Yeah. And so that first judge who did hear your case, I mean, presumably this was summary justice, so there was no jury, right? And how convincingly was the case against you thrown out? I mean, clearly the judge saw your point of view.
Yes, absolutely. And the judge in my first trial, the way it works, there's no jury. It's you just go before a judge, and a prosecutor makes their case, and your defense attorney makes their case, and then the judge decides. And she decided, just within seconds after the proceedings were done. And I've said this over and over again. My story isn't really a story about the law. The law is incredibly clear, and this judge understood the law. And the funny thing is, she really didn't like me. As soon as the proceedings came to an end, she pronounced me, not guilty, and then proceeded to belittle me and, insult me. And then at the end, she put on her COVID mask and stalked out of the courtroom. But I thanked her on the way out because she followed the law. I don't. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. If she thinks that I'm an idiot, that's absolutely fine. She followed the law, and so she acquitted me. And Laurie, it's just I don't know how to express it any more clear. The German law is absolutely clear. So it's kind of an open and shut case. So I was incredibly shocked when the prosecution decided to appeal my acquittal and put me through another trial in appeals court.
And okay, so a legal point here. I mean, there is this idea of double jeopardy in other legal systems where you can't be put on trial for the same crime twice, but that doesn't seem to be the case here. And what happened next?
Well, technically, they wouldn't call it double jeopardy because the way it works is after a trial in the district court, which I had where I was acquitted, either side can appeal to a higher court, the Kammergericht, or whatever you want to call it. It's the superior court, the highest court of Berlin. Either side can appeal to this court to have the verdict reviewed based on the interpretation of the law. So it's not a complete do-over trial. Technically, this appeals court is reviewing the verdict, and they make a decision: did the district court follow the law or not? And so that's what happened most recently. End of September, I had to go to this second trial in the appeals court, and it was very clear from the outset that they had already decided to overturn my acquittal, which they did in just a cursory fashion. They did. The prosecutor came in and said about 4 sentences in a monotone. My attorney made a fantastic case. I made a somewhat passionate statement. We took a little break. They came back and overturned my acquittal.
Right. And so that means it goes back to the lower court, does it?
No, normally it would go back to the lower court. But the appeals court it's a complicated part of German law that I won't even try to explain. The appeals court has the ability to override that process and pronounce me guilty in a way that does not allow me to go back to the district court and make the rest of my case. And that's what they did. They were determined to prevent me from going back to the district court. See, the district court acquitted me just on the, let me back up. My attorney has about 4 arguments in my defense, all of which are great arguments. The district court didn't need to hear all of those arguments because the district court recognized immediately that I was not supporting the Nazis. So the district court acquitted me on that basis. Normally, after the appeals court overturned my acquittal, we would go back to the district court and my attorney would make all of those other arguments. The appeals court has prevented that from happening and has pronounced me guilty in a way that does not allow us to go back to the district court. So all that we have left is the German Constitutional Court, the Bundesverfassungsgericht, which is basically Germany's highest court, the Supreme Court.
Right. And so you weren't properly allowed to defend yourself against the judgment in the appeal court, would you say?
Yes, correct.
Extraordinary. And so in terms of what's next, I mean, as this whole thing has been ongoing, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact, I'm sure you haven't, that, even were you acquitted by the appeals court or by the first court, the process is the punishment, as they say. And I mean, how difficult has this whole process been for you, and what kind of stress has it put you under?
It's put me under quite a lot of stress, if I'm honest. There's the cliche. I hear it from my readers all the time. The process is the punishment, and it's absolutely true. We talked about my novel a little bit, my first novel when we started, and I had been finally, at the time that all this happened, I had finally been trying to get out of war mode that I had been in during 2020 to 2022. The measures had all been lifted. I was trying to, take care of my health a bit more, and settle down, and get back into working on my second novel. And all of that got disrupted, and this has pretty much dominated my life and my consciousness. For the last, it's going on a year and a half now, I guess. And the stress, the stress is intense. The costs, the legal costs, the way this works, the way the punishment works is, normally the charges like these are leveled against a person, and someone looks at the charges and they say, okay, I got to pay 3,000 or 5,000 euro as a fine, or spend 60 days in jail, or what have you. Or I can get an attorney and I can fight this, and it's going to cost me God knows how much money. And most people just plead guilty and pay the fine. I am fortunate enough and lucky enough that my readers have donated to my quote unquote legal defense fund, and have paid for most of my legal costs. But we're talking, over 20,000 euro at this point. I would not have been able to do that without the support of my readers. So thank you. But yeah, incredibly stressful. The costs, just the. I'm an author. I'm not an activist. I'm not a terrorist. I'm an author. My reputation has been damaged. I'm technically a hate criminal. For these 2 tweets. Now I've technically been convicted of this. So yeah, it's been quite stressful.
Indeed. And obviously there's this next stage of appeal that you're going to take it to. But if you are eventually found guilty, what's the punishment you're facing?
The punishment is it's up to 3 years in jail, or I am not sure how much in fines, but many thousands of euros in fines. When it began, I had been sentenced to 60 days in jail, or 3,600 euros. Where it stands now, the district court, it does go back to district court just for sentencing. And the district court could sentence me to whatever they want.
And so just tell us a bit about this appeal you're going to be launching at the Constitutional Court. I mean, presumably that costs quite a lot of money. When is that, and how are you expecting it to go?
It could go a couple of ways. First of all, it's preparing a complaint and appeal like that to the Constitutional Court is quite costly. There's just a ton of research and preparation, and several steps are involved. And there's a lot of work for my lawyer and his advisors. He's preparing that appeal now. There's a deadline, which is at some point early mid-November. That is underway. It could go a couple of different ways. The Constitutional Court could refuse to hear the case, in which case back to the district court for me for sentencing, right? Or the Constitutional Court could hear the case and rule against me, in which case back to the district court for sentencing. Or the Constitutional Court could hear the case and rule in my favor, in which case back to the district court for a new trial. So this will, there's no end in sight in the immediate future, at least. I have to believe, I don't know what's going to happen in the Constitutional Court. Things are changing a bit in Germany. I don't know if people in the UK are aware of the Robert Koch Institute files and the leaks. The protocols, the meeting minutes of the Robert Koch Institute were leaked by a whistleblower here in Germany, and they have basically exposed the entire COVID operation as politically motivated. The Robert Koch Institute is, I don't know, what's the equivalent in the UK? In the US, it would be the CDC.
It would be SAGE, the Scientific Advisory Group.
Yeah. They're the most authoritative advisory body, and they are the body that issued all of the quote unquote data that the government based all of its COVID measures on. And through these leaks, it has been exposed and made incredibly clear that the actual science was one thing. It was being discussed inside the Robert Koch Institute, but what was released to the public and what the government relied on as justification for its measures was not the science. It was politically driven, and the exposure of this is really, it's helping to change attitudes. Because it's undeniable at this point. It's not just a conspiracy theorist saying it. It's there in black and white, and people are seeing it. So who knows? I don't know what the Constitutional Court will do. Frankly, I cannot imagine that they won't rule in my favor. Again, the German law is clear. The German Constitution is clear. The statutes are clear. And what the authorities are doing to me is absolutely clear. It's not based on the law at all. It's punishment for dissent, and it's an attempt to dissuade others from speaking out.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, there's kind of two things going on here, aren't there, it seems? There's on one hand, you're dissenting against the COVID regime, and that was enough to get you the ire even of the district court judge, who did eventually acquit you by following the letter of the law, but, it didn't seem to like you very much. But then at the same time, there's the fact that you're using a Nazi symbol to satirize the present government, and that perhaps seems to be the more significant part of this here. And so I'm just going to read you a quote from Eugippius. I know you know him as well. We've had him on this show quite a bit about that. So he says, Hopkins' conviction is about who may wield the weapons of history. The decades-long taboo that the German state has laid upon National Socialism now endows that era with remarkable polemical force. The state and its supporters would like to secure for themselves the exclusive use of the Nazi cudgel and to define the political opposition as the only appropriate target of Nazi comparisons. And for our viewers, of course, the Nazi comparison is used all the time in Germany. There's an infamous cover of Der Spiegel criticizing the AfD, which has a swastika on it. That was fine, and they didn't get prosecuted for that. But, it's almost, why do you think there's so much animus against using this comparison to criticize the ruling regime as opposed to using it to criticize the opponents of the regime?
It's absolutely correct. You mentioned the cover of Der Spiegel, which was amazing when that came out, because it's basically exactly the same concept as my artwork. I made this point in court, to the appeals court. Our artwork is exactly the same. The only difference is Der Spiegel covered a swastika with the German flag, and I covered a swastika with a COVID mask. Der Spiegel was referring to the AfD. They were, demonizing the Alternative for Deutschland party as neo-Nazis. I was comparing the COVID measures and this whole new normal regime to the rise of Nazi Germany. It's exactly the same thing. Many people, a lot of people and lawyers have filed complaints against Der Spiegel, against Karl Lauterbach, who's also tweeted swastikas, against other prominent German celebrities who have used swastikas to do the same thing. Compare, for example, Russia to the Nazis and so on. It's naked, Laurie. I mean, it's blatant. Yes, swastikas are published all the time in Germany, as long as they are being used to demonize the government's opposition, to demonize right-wing populism, the AfD. And I'm not an AfD fan. I'm an old lefty. Yeah. But as long as they're being used to demonize the AfD, that's absolutely fine, right? But God help you if you make that same comparison to the government, and then suddenly you're disseminating Nazi propaganda. I don't know how to explain it, because there's really nothing to explain. It's just a show of force. We can do it and you can't. It's really that simple.
And so in terms of that show of force from the ruling authorities, so in, I think, your first novel, so Zone 23 from 2017, that was what I haven't read it, I'm afraid, but just from the blurb, that describes a dystopian society where, quote, all dissent and nonconformity has been pathologized. So what were you able to see there that is kind of prophetic about the totalitarianism that you say is emerging in our society?
I'll try to keep this short. This is usually where you've opened a can of worms that leads to me babbling at great length about this. I have made the point. I've tried to make the point over and over again that when I talk about the new Normal Reich, or I talk about this new form of totalitarianism that we're seeing being implemented, and still, to me, the 2020 to 2022 was just the shock and awe phase of it. And it's continuing. I've made the point over and over again that when I talk about this as a new form of totalitarianism, I'm not talking about 20th century totalitarianism. It's not, Nazis running around with jackboots, and having Nuremberg rallies. And it's not it's not Stalinism and Soviet Union. It's not that type of totalitarianism. It's a new form of totalitarianism. It's global. And it's global capitalist. Sorry, folks, I said it again. I've described it as pathologized totalitarianism. And what I mean by that is there's a global crackdown on dissent underway. We dissidents, and regardless whether we are old lefties like me or right populists, people like Gypsius whose writing I love, but he's way over on the right, I'm way over on the left. It doesn't matter. Anyone who is opposing the implementation of the new ideology, the new rules, which are being rolled out globally, we're not demonized as political opponents. We are pathologized. We are no longer seen as a political opposition. We are seen as some sort of malignant, pathological force. We are, COVID deniers or conspiracy theorists. In one way or another, we are painted as deranged and not in touch with reality. And this is a part of the pathologization that I tried to capture during 2020 and 2022. And I've been tracking it for years and years, and that's why it is so present in the novel. The novel in Zone 23, I trying to paint a picture of a society where that has already progressed to the nth degree. And anyone basically who is not conforming to the official reality is viewed pathologically.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And in fact, one of our writers, Freddie Attenborough of the Free Speech Union, he often writes about this phenomenon of the pathologization of speech. And I think you might be interested in that, actually.
Can I interrupt you for a second, Laurie? And the term hate speech, which is, has mostly become normalized. People take it for granted now. People use this term. The absurdity of this term has already been lost and forgotten. This is a complete pathologization of something. What is hate speech? Right? What is this exactly? This is speech that is somehow infused with hate or motivated by hate. We all, in democratic countries, we all have laws. We already had laws on the books, to prevent people from committing various offenses with speech. Harassment. Harassment is an offense. Fraud. There are laws on the book. It's just the idea that somehow the expression of an emotion, and it's an ugly emotion, hatred is an ugly emotion, but somehow the idea of the expression of an emotion has become a crime. This is an example of the pathologization that I'm talking about.
And so finally, I mean, you mentioned we're coming out of the COVID era now, and people are sort of waking up to, how authoritarian that was bit by bit. And, another dearly held establishment narrative that's on which things are shifting a bit now, especially in Europe, is immigration. And just I suppose on both of those, and generally, do you think that Western publics are to an extent waking up about more things now? And what's your sense of how things are changing there?
I think things are shifting, and I think to a certain degree, I think it's a minority, but I think there's a portion of the general public that might be opening their minds a bit and asking questions. I'm talking about the majority that just clicked heels and followed orders, during 2020 and 2022. It's happening, but we've got a long, long way to go. The polarization, the divide in society, the polarization is so intense. I don't know how or when we can actually radically change it. People are so dug in. When people describe writers like me, writers like Matt Taibbi as far right people, Matt Taibbi is a big fat liberal. I know Matt, and I can say that about him. I love him. Matt is just like, if you look up liberal in the dictionary, you'll find Matt. I'm an old lefty, and we are now demonized as extreme right people. I'm convicted of spreading pro-Nazi propaganda, which is just it's absolutely absurd, and it's the result of this polarization that has really divided society into these two camps, where anytime anyone says anything that challenges the ideological, challenges the views on one side or the other, that person is immediately slammed into a box, labeled, and demonized as, being the enemy on the other side. People are not, for the most part, of course, there are exceptions, thank God, but so much of society is incapable of listening, incapable of reading, incapable of thinking, and is just kind of scanning the world and looking for who's in my camp and who's in the other camp and who are the bad ones and who are the good ones. And it's a very, very frightening road that we're on.
And so finally, in terms of your legal defense fund, where can people find that if people want to donate to you, and if they want to read your stuff more broadly, where can they find you?
My Substack is the easiest. People can just put me in a search engine, just put my name in a search engine and everything will come up. But my Substack is the main place. My blog is still active, The Consent Factory. I still post there. But my Substack is where most of the action is. So, just put CJ Hopkins Substack in a search engine and they will find everything. I'm still gratefully accepting donations to my legal defense fund. But let me say the response has already been overwhelming. And I don't know how to express my gratitude to all of my readers who have donated. So anyway.
Okay, well, CJ Hopkins, thanks very much for coming on.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
And that's it for this edition of The Sceptic. Thanks for watching, and see you again next week, where we'll be back with a bumper episode.